In their legendary recording career, Steely Dan released 18 songs as singles, not including B-sides. Given that in their classic period, Steely Dan never released a bad song, we can talk about some of the things that happened outside of that period. Surely they had other tracks that were singles worthy, but were never released as such. In this video, we're going to talk about those sadly neglected potential hits. Hey there, Swan Shadow here. Welcome back to the nest. As some of you are probably aware, I've done an entire series of videos in which I examine all of the songs that Steely Dan released during their classic period, from 1972 to 1980. The foundational principle of that series is that not one of the 64 songs released in that period is terrible. In fact, even my least favorite of those songs is at the very least quite listenable and of high musical quality. I've also done a pair of videos talking about the tracks on the two albums that the reformed Steely Dan released in the early 2000s. All of those videos are on my Steely Dan playlist, which you should definitely check out if you're a fan of the Dan. As I mentioned in the opening, Steely Dan released 18 songs as A-side singles. That's not including the song Dallas, which was recorded and released before the band recorded their debut studio album, Can't Buy a Thrill, in 1972. Dallas is, and I'm being brutally honest here, not very good. But since it came out prior to the Dan's classic period, we'll ignore it for the purposes of this discussion. So, 18 singles. But without question, Steely Dan had other songs that were worthy of release as singles. In fact, a couple of them might have been even more worthy than some of the tracks the record label actually chose. What I've done for this video is go through all 9 Steely Dan studio albums. That's the 7 classic period albums plus the 2 later recordings, and identified one song from each album that, in my considered opinion, deserved its own release as a single. Because I really believe that all of the songs we're going to talk about today could have been hits, given the opportunity and the promotional exposure. So with that, let's dive in. From the debut album, I'm going with track number 9, Change of the Guard. This song is one of the most upbeat numbers in the entire Steely Dan catalog. We have to admit, they're not an act known for their chipper, cheerful tunes. But Change of the Guard is a fine example of what Becker and Fagen could come up with when they decided to write something compact and radio-friendly. The crisp guitar work by Jeff "Skunk" Baxter doesn't hurt any either. This is a song that sounds like a lot of what was playing on the radio in 1972, and I think it would have fit in there very nicely. You know, I almost went with a different track from this album, Midnight Cruiser, which I actually like better as a song. It has a great, catchy, memorable chorus. But that one features drummer Jim Hodder on lead vocals. At this early stage of the band's development, I think it might have confused the audience if the band had released a third single with a different singer from the one who sang on Do It Again and Reelin' in the Years. On Change of the Guard, Fagen shares the lead vocal with David Palmer, but it's Fagen's voice that stands out. So while I slightly prefer Midnight Cruiser as a song, I think Change of the Guard would have been the optimal choice for a third single from the debut album. From the second album, Countdown to Ecstasy, well, it's tough. There really isn't a lot of concise, catchy material on this record. I'm not sure that either of the 2 songs that clock in at under 4 minutes, Razor Boy and Pearl of the Quarter, showcase the band at their best from a pop radio perspective. Although those were the B-sides of the 2 singles released from this album, Showbiz Kids and My Old School. So, in the absence of better options, I'm going with Your Gold Teeth, a punchy, vibrant number whose main challenge as a radio release is the fact that it's just 1 second shy of 7 minutes long. But I think it would be possible to make a tighter edit of Your Gold Teeth that would sneak it in through that narrow 1973 time slot window. So that's my pick, and I'm sticking to it. Now, if you've already checked out my Steely Dan ranking video, you might be surprised that I didn't choose Any Major Dude Will Tell You as my potential third single from the album Pretzel Logic. Because you'll remember, Any Major Dude landed almost in the middle of my top 10 favorite Steely Dan songs of all time. However, as much as I love Any Major Dude, I do think there's another song on Pretzel Logic that might have made an even better radio single. That song is Night by Night, which launches out of the gate with a bit more ear-catching funk and firepower than the more laid-back Any Major Dude. Night by Night is one of the more underappreciated tunes in the Steely Dan repertoire. It's definitely a top 20 Dan track in my estimation. And given the fact that Any Major Dude got a significant amount of airplay anyway as the B-side of Ricky Don't Lose That Number, the big hit from Pretzel Logic, I would have liked to have seen Night by Night garner some extra attention. As fond as I am of both Black Friday and Bad Sneakers, the two singles released from Steely Dan's fourth album, Katie Lied, it's borderline criminal to me that Dr. Wu, a top 10 Steely Dan song if ever I heard one, never got cut loose on its own. Dr. Wu is one of the first tracks that really gives us the full flavor of the direction that Fagen and Becker were heading with their music on subsequent albums. If Dr. Wu has anything detracting from it for radio airplay, it's maybe a little bit relaxed at the very beginning, but it definitely ramps up in energy as it winds towards its conclusion. And come on, that's one of the most memorable choruses in the entire Steely Dan repertoire. It's hard to imagine a more radio-friendly song from the latter half of Steely Dan's classic period than The Caves of Altamira, track number 2 on the Royal Scam, the Dan's fifth album. It's got that cascade of horns at the start that grabs you by the ears. It's got a jazzy beat that gets you moving and grooving. It's got a clear, well-articulated vocal by Fagen, and another clever, hooky chorus. The downside of this one might just have been the title. Until you listen to the song and absorb the lyrics, The Caves of Altamira doesn't really give you much insight into what the song is about. It sounds more like a National Geographic documentary than a pop rock tune. But it is a pop rock tune, and a fantastic one at that. Asia was the rare Steely Dan album that actually rated 3 singles releases: Peg, Josie, and Deacon Blues. Plus, the title number, Asia, received a fair amount of airplay as an album track. So you might think that pretty well exhausted the options for great radio singles, right? Wrong. Because the song that opens the album, Black Cow, is every bit as worthy of attention as those other 4. And it's got enough juice to have you bobbing your head and working your shoulders as you're driving in your car. The bass line by Chuck Rainey alone, one of the best in his stellar list of Steely Dan appearances, makes Black Cow sufficiently groovy to rate space on the airwaves. Give it a listen and see if you don't agree. The song I've chosen as an additional single from the album Gaucho, the 7th and final album of Steely Dan's classic period, comes with a bit of an asterisk. Babylon Sisters actually was released as a single, but not in the United States. It was a UK-only single release. So I feel okay with including it here because it's certainly rated worthiness as a radio track on this side of the pond as well. Babylon Sisters is anchored by one of the finest examples of the legendary Purdy Shuffle, created and performed by drummer Bernard "Pretty" Purdy, and imitated by countless other percussionists, but never quite as flawlessly. Just a side note about that, Babylon Sisters is one of only 3 tracks on Gaucho on which the drumming was entirely performed by a human being. The other 2 were Time Out of Mind and Third World Man. On the other 4 numbers, the basic drum track was played by a drum machine nicknamed Wendell, invented by studio engineer Roger Nichols specifically for this recording. An actual live drummer then added the fills on these 4 tracks. Wendell was such an integral part of the recording process that I guess he was awarded a platinum record when Gaucho certified at 1 million copies sold. Not relevant to the topic at hand, but I always just thought that was interesting. The lone single released from Two Against Nature, the first and, in my opinion, far superior of Steely Dan's 2 reunion albums, was strong enough to earn a Grammy in 2000 for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. That song was Cousin Dupree, which is indeed one of the better tracks on the album. But I think that Jack of Speed, the track that immediately precedes Cousin Dupree on Two Against Nature, is every bit as singles worthy and might even be a more solid example of where Fagen and Becker were at this point in their collaborative career. Jack of Speed is one of the few songs on the reunion albums that I think could have appeared on, say, Gaucho from the classic period and fit right in seamlessly. I have never understood why Blues Beach was selected as the one and only single from Everything Must Go, Steely Dan's final studio album. Blues Beach is not really up to the standard of the classic period albums, and frankly, it's not even one of the better songs on this album, their weakest effort overall. A better choice in my view would have been Pixeline, which it's still not upper tier Steely Dan, but it's a pretty good song for what it is. It's bright and upbeat and it has a nice hook, and it's more in line with what we think of when we think of Steely Dan than Blues Beach. Honorable mention goes to Lunch with Gina, the song immediately following Pixeline. It's not a great song, but again, it's a good one. If you had to pick a single from this sadly inferior recording, it really should have been one of these 2. I want to give a special shout out to a song that not only never became a single, but also never appeared on any Steely Dan studio album. That song is Here at the Western World, included on the first Steely Dan Greatest Hits package, a 2-disc set released in 1978. Here at the Western World was recorded during the sessions for The Royal Scam, the 1976 album, but for whatever reason, it wasn't used for that record or either of the 2 subsequent classic period albums. I'm not sure why. It's a top 10 Steely Dan track for me, and I think it would have made a fine radio single. If you're not familiar with Here at the Western World, you're in for a treat. Go give it a listen, and you'll thank me later. There you go, 10 Steely Dan songs that should have been singles, but sadly never were. Are there other neglected tracks by the Dan that you think could have been radio hits if given the chance? List those in the comments below. And while you're down there, I'd sincerely appreciate a thumbs up for this video if you enjoyed it, and a click to subscribe if you haven't done that already. I've got more musical musings in the works, and you won't want to miss a minute. I will see you when I see you. Until then, be well and do well for the people around you. And I have to ask, is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car.